I used to believe that motivation was something that arrived. Like weather, like a mood, like a phone call you'd been waiting for, and one day it would come, and you would feel it, and then you would begin. I spent a long time waiting for that call. Years, honestly. Sitting at the edge of things I wanted to do, telling myself that I just needed to feel ready first. That the right moment would announce itself somehow. That I would wake up one morning and the fog would be gone and I would simply begin. The fog never lifted on its own. I had to walk into it. Let me tell you where I was at 28. On paper, fine. Employed, housed, healthy. I had a job in marketing that paid the bills and asked nothing interesting of me, which felt, at the time, like a reasonable trade. I had an apartment with a window that faced a brick wall and a kitchen I barely used. I had a gym membership I visited with the frequency of a solar eclipse. I had a novel I was writing, or rather, a novel I was going to write, which existed entirely in a document titled Ideas. Doc that I hadn't opened in 11 months. I had a life that looked, from a certain angle, like preparation. I was preparing to start. Preparing to try. Preparing to become the version of myself that actually did things rather than thought about doing them. The preparation had been going on for 4 years. The problem, I understood eventually, was that I had completely misread what motivation actually is. I had treated it like fuel. Like you fill the tank first, and then you drive. And that image, that sequence, had locked me in place completely because the tank never felt full. There was always a reason to wait a little longer. Always something that wasn't quite right yet. Always a version of myself just around the corner who would be more ready, more confident, more equipped than the one currently sitting on the couch watching other people do things on a screen. The version of me who was ready never showed up. Because he was waiting for me to go first. The first thing that cracked it open was small. Almost embarrassingly small. I signed up for a 5-kilometre run. Not a marathon. Not a triathlon. 5 kilometers. The kind of distance a reasonably healthy person could complete without significant training. I signed up because a colleague named Steve mentioned it in passing, and I said yes before I had time to talk myself out of it, which was the only reason it happened. The race was 6 weeks away. Here is what I noticed in those 6 weeks. I ran because the race was coming, not because I felt motivated to run. The motivation didn't precede the action. It followed it. The first run was terrible, 15 minutes, mostly walking, lungs complaining loudly about the situation. But after, sitting on a bench with my heart still loud in my chest, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not pride exactly. Something simpler. The feeling of having done a thing rather than thought about it. I ran again the next day. Not because I was motivated. Because I had run the day before. That was the first lesson, and it sounds almost too simple to be worth saying. Action creates motivation. Not the other way around. I know that's not new. People have been saying it for years in books and podcasts, and on the walls of gyms everywhere. But there is a significant difference between knowing something and experiencing it in your body. Between reading the words and feeling, at the end of a bad run on a cold morning, that you are the kind of person who runs now. Identity follows action. You don't think your way into being someone different. You do your way into it. Slowly, badly, inconsistently, but forward. The run led to other things. Not because I had some grand plan. Because the experience of doing one hard thing made the next hard thing slightly more conceivable. That's how it works, I discovered. Not in leaps, not in transformation, but in this slow accumulation of evidence that you are capable of more than you currently believe. I opened Ideas, Doc. It was worse than I remembered. Scattered, half-formed, full of the kind of notes that make sense at midnight, and nothing at all in daylight. I closed it again almost immediately. But I opened it. The next day I opened it again and wrote 3 sentences. They were not good sentences. But they existed, which was 3 sentences more than had existed the day before. I wrote 3 sentences every morning for 2 weeks before I stopped counting and just wrote. At the end of 3 months, I had 40 pages. At the end of 8 months, I had a first draft. It wasn't a good first draft. First drafts are never good. That's not what they are for. What they are for is existing. For being the thing you work on, rather than the thing you dream about working on. The gap between those two states is everything. I want to talk about the bad days, because I think that's the part that gets left out. The motivational story, the one I'm technically telling right now, tends to skip over the Wednesday mornings when you don't run. When you open the document and write one sentence and close it again. When the gap between who you are and who you're trying to become feels not like a manageable distance, but like a fundamental fact about your character. Like proof, those days happened. Constantly. What I learned, slowly and with some resistance, was that those days are not the exception. They are the texture of the thing. Doing something hard over time doesn't mean feeling good about it most of the time. It means continuing anyway, not because you've resolved the difficulty, but because you've decided that the difficulty is part of the deal and you're taking the deal. There's a word for continuing on days when you don't feel like it. It's not motivation. It's discipline. And discipline, unlike motivation, doesn't require a feeling. It just requires a decision. Made once, and then made again on the Wednesday morning when everything in you would rather stay in bed. About 18 months into all of this, something happened that I didn't expect. I started to enjoy it. Not the running, I still don't love running, I want to be honest about that. But the practice of it. The ritual. The fact of having a thing I did, regardless of how I felt, that was mine. The writing especially. What had started as a daily obligation became the part of the day I protected most fiercely. The hour before work when the apartment was quiet and the document was open and I was, for that hour, the person I had spent 4 years waiting to become. That feeling, I want to be careful about how I describe it, because it's easy to make it sound more romantic than it is. It wasn't transcendence. It wasn't flow exactly or not always. It was more like the feeling of a key fitting a lock. The right-sized life. Being in the correct relationship with time. I had spent years preparing to live. I had started instead living. I finished the novel at 29. It took 11 more months after that first draft to make it into something I wasn't ashamed of. I sent it to agents. Most said no. One said yes. It wasn't published. The agent and I worked on it for a year and then parted ways. The book wasn't quite right for the market, which is publishing's polite way of saying many things at once. I could have treated that as an ending. I treated it as information. I started the next one. I'm 33 now. I run 3 times a week. Still don't love it, still go. I'm on my 3rd book. The first one lives in a drawer, which is exactly where first novels belong. The second one is with a new agent. The third one is 40 pages, and already better than anything I wrote before, which is how it should work if you're paying attention. I still have bad days. Bad weeks sometimes. Stretches where the writing is terrible, and the running is worse, and the gap between where I am and where I want to be feels, again, like a fundamental fact rather than a temporary distance. On those days, I do the thing anyway. Not because I feel motivated. Because I have learned, slowly and with significant evidence, that the feeling follows the doing, not the other way around. That readiness is not a state you arrive at. It's a state you build, one bad run and one imperfect sentence at a time, until one day you look up and realize that the person who was waiting to begin has, without quite noticing, already begun. The fog didn't lift. I walked into it. And on the other side, not of the fog, but inside it, further in than I'd ever gone before, I found what I'd been waiting for. Not the version of myself who was finally ready. Just myself, doing the work, which turns out to be the same thing.